The laughter and clinking glasses at my son's birthday party couldn't drown out the chill in Olivia's voice. "Grandpa, you're not safe here. Please, trust me and leave." I had no idea my own family was plotting the ultimate betrayal tonight. Before we begin, I invite you to settle in and listen closely, a quiet moment for an old man's story, told in his own words. I'm Walter Bennett, and tonight I want to share with you how a simple family birthday changed everything I thought I knew about trust. The last of the evening sun bled through the maple trees as I parked outside Eric's house, my son's tidy suburban home glowing with strings of white lights and the soft hum of a party already underway. I sat for a moment behind the wheel, steadying my nerves with a deep breath. Birthday parties weren't new, a tradition in the Bennett family, even if the faces around the table had changed over the years. But tonight felt different. There was a pressure in my chest, a sense that something vital had shifted beneath the surface. I grabbed the gift bag from the passenger seat, a bottle of whiskey Eric would never appreciate, and made my way up the front walk. Laughter spilled out from the open windows, but even from outside, I could sense the tension shimmering underneath. Maybe it was the way Samantha's voice carried, a little too crisp and bright, as if she were playing hostess for strangers rather than family. Eric greeted me at the door with a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Dad, you made it! Come on in, everyone's waiting." He clapped me on the shoulder, guiding me inside with a little more urgency than usual. The living room was transformed. Balloons, banners, a spread of food that looked like it belonged in a magazine. Samantha floated from guest to guest, her laugh just a little too high, her glances darting around the room, calculating. Olivia was tucked in the corner, thumbing the edge of a paper plate, her face pale and drawn. She looked up as I entered, meeting my gaze for a split second before ducking her head. The house felt crowded and yet oddly hollow. I said hello to friends and neighbors, exchanged the usual small talk, but beneath the surface, my skin prickled with unease. Eric busied himself pouring drinks, checking his phone, keeping a careful eye on Samantha and the guests. The two of them shared a whispered conversation in the kitchen, glancing over at me just a beat too long. I tried to focus on the celebration, but the laughter seemed brittle, the music just a little too loud. Even Olivia, usually the life of any family gathering, seemed withdrawn, her hands trembling as she picked at her food. At one point, Samantha breezed by, pressing a glass of wine into my hand. "You must try this, Walter. It's Eric's favorite," she said, her smile wide and practiced. I nodded, forcing a smile back, but something in her eyes made the hairs on my neck stand up. Then, as the cake was brought out and voices joined in a half-hearted rendition of "Happy Birthday," Olivia slipped quietly to my side. She didn't look up, just pressed her small hand into mine. Her palm was clammy and her grip trembled. "Grandpa," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the chorus and clinking glasses. "Please, don't eat or drink anything here. We need to leave, now." For a moment, the world seemed to freeze. I stared down at my granddaughter, heart pounding, the warning ringing in my ears louder than any song. In that instant, I knew this was no ordinary birthday party. The noise from the party faded behind me as I stepped out onto Eric's back porch, craving a moment of quiet. The cool Portland air carried the scent of new grass and distant rain, and for a few seconds I let myself believe that maybe this was just a normal night, a normal birthday. But the unease wouldn't leave my chest. I wasn't alone for long. The door slid open and Eric stepped outside, his silhouette tense in the porch light. He closed the door behind him, shutting out Samantha's laughter and the clink of glasses. For a moment, we just stood there, the space between us heavy with things unsaid. "Dad, can we talk?" he asked, his voice low and urgent. I nodded, bracing myself. I knew this tone, the way he waited until the world was quieter when I was off guard. "Of course, son. What's on your mind?" He took a breath. "I know things haven't always worked out, but I've got something lined up, a real shot this time, not like before. It's a property syndicate, small group, huge upside. I just need a little help to get in." "How much is a little help, Eric?" He hesitated, then rushed the words. 75,000. That's just for the buy-in. Dad, I've run the numbers. I've done my research. This is different. I studied his face, searching for the boy I remembered, the one who used to build tree houses in our backyard, who once brought home stray dogs and tried to nurse them back to health. But the man in front of me looked desperate, older than his years, his eyes flickering with hope and fear. Eric, I said carefully, I want to believe you. I always have. But you have to understand, every time I've bailed you out, it's only led to more trouble. You need to stand on your own. His jaw tightened. You never trust me. Every time I try, you just remind me of my failures. I shook my head, feeling a heaviness settle in my bones. That's not true. I remember every good thing you've done, but I also remember the calls in the middle of the night, the tears, the promises. I can't keep doing this. He looked away, frustration simmering beneath the surface. You think I want to ask? You think I like needing your help? But if I don't get in now, I'll never catch up. I thought of Olivia inside, her worried eyes, the way she held my hand earlier. I thought of Samantha, always watching, always calculating. I thought of all the years I'd spent trying to save Eric from his own mistakes and how it never changed anything. I'm sorry, son. I can't. He stared at me, a mix of anger and wounded pride. When I finally make it, don't expect me to share it with you. I managed a tired smile. That's fair, Eric. You should build something that's truly yours. He turned and left, the door hissing closed behind him. I stayed on the porch, staring out into the darkness, listening to the faint sounds of celebration inside. For a long while, I stood there, remembering the boy he'd been and mourning the man he'd become. Back inside, the party had moved on without me. I returned to the edge of the living room, watching Olivia as she laughed a little too loudly at a joke from one of her friends. Our eyes met across the room, her smile fading as she read the sadness in my face. Sometimes, the hardest part of being a parent isn't saying no. It's knowing that love alone won't save your child from himself. Stand it, but I wanted to believe in his optimism. $50,000 wired to a company that vanished overnight. Another lesson, another scar. Then the food truck, a business plan so detailed I almost let myself hope. This one's different, Dad, Eric had insisted, eyes bright. I'd co-signed the loan, met his partner, ignored my gut when background checks came up thin. 93 days later, the truck was gone, the partner gone, and Eric left with little more than apologies. Each file told the same story, my willingness to rescue him, my stubborn hope that this time would be different. And each time, the pattern repeated. Eric's optimism, my hesitation, my eventual surrender. Each time, I told myself I was doing the right thing, but the weight in my chest said otherwise. I placed the folders in a neat stack, staring at the names and dates. How many times could a father save his son before realizing he was just postponing the fall? I wondered, not for the first time, if my help had only made things worse. A faint tap at the window startled me. Rain had started to fall, tapping softly against the glass. I looked out into the darkness, seeing only my own reflection and the blurred lights from the street. Somewhere, in a house not far from mine, Eric was probably telling himself that tomorrow would bring a new chance. Maybe it would. Or maybe, for both of us, the time for second chances was finally over. I turned off the lamp and sat quietly in the dark, listening to the rain, feeling the ache of too many memories. Sometimes, the loneliest moments come right after a crowded room. That night, when the last guest had gone and Eric's house fell silent, I drove home in the drizzle, headlights carving pale tunnels through empty Portland streets. My mind kept circling the conversation on the porch, replaying Eric's wounded pride and the echo of Olivia's warning. The city felt colder than usual. Maybe it was just me, growing older, growing tired. I let myself into my own quiet house. The familiar creak of the floorboards, the tick of the hallway clock, the scent of sawdust and old books. These things should have comforted me. Instead, they felt like the background of a life slowly shrinking. I set my keys on the kitchen counter, shrugged off my jacket, and wandered into my study. The lamp on my desk threw a warm pool of light across the piles of paperwork waiting for me, but I was drawn, as I always was on nights like this, to the bottom drawer. Records, bank statements, a lifetime of ledgers. Most people keep photo albums to remember their children's milestones. Me, I kept folders, each one labeled in my careful block lettering. Eric Miami, 2014. Eric Crypto, 2017. Eric Food Truck, 2019. I pulled out the oldest file, the edges soft from handling, and flipped through yellowed contracts and faded emails. Miami condos, the first big dream. I remembered Eric's excitement, the way he'd laid the glossy brochures across my dining table, convinced he'd found his ticket to a better life. I'd written the check, trusting the hope in his voice more than my own business sense. 3 months later, foreclosure notices arrived. Money gone. Trust cracked. Eric promising to pay me back as soon as things turned around. They never did. I moved to the next folder. Cryptocurrency mining, the future, he'd said, showing me videos of blinking servers in some distant warehouse. I didn't understand. Some mornings, the world tries to warn you before you're even fully awake. That Sunday, I was up before the sun, restless after a night spent chasing old regrets through my dreams. The rain had stopped, but the clouds hung low over Portland, painting everything in dull gray. I made coffee, savoring the silence, hoping a routine would settle my mind. I'd planned to spend the morning organizing my garage, a small act of control in a week that had left me feeling powerless. But when I stepped outside, the first thing I noticed was the way my Honda sat lower than usual, almost slumped on its haunches like a wounded animal. A knot tightened in my gut. I walked around the car, steam from my coffee mug curling into the chilly air, and crouched down to inspect the front tire. The rubber was completely flat. So was the one behind it. I moved to the other side. Same story. All 4 tires deflated. It wasn't the slow leak of age or a forgotten nail from the driveway. Each tire had a puncture close to the sidewall, small and clean, the kind you'd get from a tool, not from the road. I ran my finger along one gash and found the culprit, a roofing nail, the kind I kept in a jar on my workbench for emergency fixes. For a moment, I just stood there, the mug cooling in my hand, watching the light creep across the empty street. The neighborhood was quiet. No kids, no dogs, no early joggers. Just me and 4 ruined tires. I called Officer Carla Ramirez, the patrol cop who covered our neighborhood. She arrived within 20 minutes, her cruiser rolling to a stop at the curb. Carla was young, sharp-eyed, and had always treated me with a kind of gentle respect. She listened as I explained what I'd found, then crouched beside me to inspect the damage. "This wasn't an accident, Mr. Bennett," she said, tapping a nail with her pen. "All 4, same spot, same depth. Someone did this on purpose." She asked if I'd had any disagreements lately, anyone who might want to send a message. I hesitated. It felt wrong, even now, to say my own son's name. "Just the usual family stress," I said quietly. "My son's been having a hard time." Carla nodded, jotting notes in her pad. "I'll file a report, we'll keep an eye out. Might want to check your security cameras, if you have them." I thanked her and watched as she drove away, her taillights disappearing into the gray morning. I stood in the driveway, coffee now cold, and let the ache settle in. The evidence was clear. This was no random act. Someone wanted to hurt me, or at least send a message. I looked up at the house across the street. Mrs. Carter's curtains twitched, then fell still. She'd been up early, as always, sitting by her window with her tea. I wondered how much she'd seen. Back inside, I called the tow truck, then sat at the kitchen table, staring at my phone, my mind replaying the events of the last week. Eric's anger, the party, Olivia's warning. The memory of his voice, "You'll regret this, Dad," rang louder now than it had in the dark. For the first time, I allowed myself to put the pieces together without making excuses. Sometimes the hardest truths are the ones you already know deep down. As the morning wore on and the neighborhood woke up, I realized the line between family and stranger can vanish in a single night. All it takes is one nail, one betrayal, to change everything. It's strange how quickly suspicion can take root, even in the soil of family. That afternoon, as I waited for the tow truck to haul away my crippled car, I found myself staring out the window at Mrs. Carter's house. Her curtains fluttered again, and for a moment I caught her silhouette, thin, dignified, backlit by the soft lamplight of her living room. She'd lived across the street for decades, seen the rise and fall of more families than I cared to count. After lunch, I dialed Eric's number, my thumb hesitating over the call button. There was a time when I'd have called to ask for his help with a flat tire, when the idea of accusing him of anything worse would have felt absurd. But trust, once cracked, never fits quite the same. Eric answered on the third ring. "Dad, everything okay?" I kept my voice as even as I could. "Someone slashed all 4 tires on my car last night. Officer Ramirez said it was deliberate." A pause. "That's awful. Probably some kids, right? Spring break and all." "All 4? Same spot? With roofing nails?" I said, watching for any tremor in his voice. "You didn't see anything when you left the party?" He hesitated, just for a heartbeat. "No, Dad. I drove straight home. You know I'd never. I mean, who would do something like that?" The old ache in my chest throbbed. "I'm just trying to understand, that's all." He let out a frustrated sigh. "Look, I know things have been tense, but I'm not out to get you, Dad." We exchanged a few more words, formal, stilted, the way strangers might talk at a bus stop, and then he hung up, leaving a silence that rang louder than any accusation. I sat at the table, tracing the rim of my coffee mug, when a knock sounded at the door. Mrs. Carter stood on my porch, wrapped in a faded blue cardigan, her hair pulled back in its usual neat bun. "Walter, I hope I'm not interrupting," she said, her voice gentle but purposeful. "Not at all, Jean. Please, come in." She settled into my kitchen chair, hands folded around a mug of tea I brewed out of habit. For a moment, we talked about the weather, her garden, the price of eggs, but I could see the worry flickering in her eyes. "I saw Eric last night," she said finally, her words careful and clear. "It was late, maybe close to midnight. He walked around your car, stopped at each tire. I thought maybe he was just checking on something, but it seemed odd." A chill ran down my spine. "You're sure it was Eric?" She nodded. "I've known that boy since he was little. He was wearing that old Seahawks jacket, the one he always wore in high school." I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the truth settle. Here it was, spoken plainly, stripped of all the hopeful denials I'd offered myself. Jean, Mrs. Carter reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "I didn't want to meddle, but I thought you should know. Family or not, you deserve to be safe." "Thank you," I whispered, "for telling me, for watching out." She gave me a sad smile. "Sometimes, Walter, protecting someone means telling them what they don't want to hear." After she left, I opened a new page in my notebook and began writing down every detail I could remember. Dates, times, words spoken, looks exchanged. The old habit of record-keeping returned, this time not for business, but for survival. By sundown, the evidence was no longer just suspicion. It was fact. My son had crossed a line, and there was no easy way back. Some invitations arrive wrapped in warmth, but this one felt more like a summons. 2 days after the tire incident, Eric called me in the late afternoon. His tone was unusually bright, the sort of brightness that always made me wary. "Dad, why don't you come over for dinner tonight? Just family. We'll keep it simple. Olivia's been asking about you, and Sam's making her famous roast. Let's put the last week behind us." I hesitated, looking at the empty coffee cup in my hand. Part of me wanted to decline, to keep my distance until I could sort out my thoughts. But another part, a stubborn, old habit, wanted to believe that maybe my son was reaching out for reconciliation, not retribution. "Sure," I said finally. "I'll be there at 6. The drive to Eric's house felt longer than usual. I rehearsed a dozen versions of the conversation I might have with him, each ending with some fragile hope of understanding. But as I pulled up to the curb, I noticed the lights blazing in every window, the front walk swept clean, the air sharp with the scent of something rich roasting in the oven. Samantha greeted me at the door, her smile wide and practiced. "Walter, we're so glad you could make it. Come in, come in. Olivia's setting the table." Inside, everything gleamed. The dining room was laid out with the good china, crystal glasses sparkling in the overhead light. Olivia moved quietly around the table, arranging napkins, her eyes flicking up to meet mine for only a second before dropping again. Eric poured me a drink, scotch, neat, then sat across from me, his hands folded tightly on the tablecloth. "Dad, I want tonight to be about family. No business, no fights, just a good meal." I nodded, but I couldn't shake the feeling that every gesture had been rehearsed. Samantha bustled in and out of the kitchen, offering hors d'oeuvres, topping off my glass before it was half empty. Eric steered the conversation to old memories, fishing trips, Olivia's childhood birthdays, stories that should have been comforting, but felt instead like a performance for an audience I couldn't see. Dinner arrived, roast beef, potatoes, everything cooked to perfection. But I noticed how often Samantha and Eric exchanged glances, silent signals passing between them. Olivia, usually vibrant, barely spoke, her fork tracing patterns in her mashed potatoes. After dessert, Eric leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Dad, I'd like you to come upstairs for a minute. There's some paperwork I need your signature on, just routine stuff about the family business. It'll only take a second." Samantha smiled, her hand resting lightly on Eric's arm. "It's nothing complicated, we just want to get everything in order." I felt Olivia's gaze burning into me, her face pale, lips pressed into a thin line. She shook her head almost imperceptibly. For a heartbeat, the room seemed to narrow. The roast on my plate grew cold, the laughter from earlier faded. I set my napkin aside, pushing back my chair. "Maybe another time," I said, forcing a smile. "I'm not feeling quite myself tonight." Eric's face fell, disappointment and something sharper flickering in his eyes. Samantha's grip on his arm tightened. Olivia let out a breath I hadn't realized she'd been holding. I stood, thanking Samantha for dinner, and glanced down at Olivia, who met my eyes with silent relief. I knew I'd done the right thing, but the sense of danger lingered, as real as the chill that crept up my spine as I stepped out into the night. Night in Portland always seems quietest after a hard decision. I drove home from Eric's house with my hands tight on the wheel, replaying every glance, every forced smile, every glass of scotch that Samantha had tried to refill. I wondered how close I'd come to making a mistake I couldn't undo. The streetlights painted long shadows across the dashboard, and for a while it felt like every mile put a little more distance between me and the danger I'd just left behind. Just as I parked in my driveway, my phone vibrated. Olivia's name flashed across the screen. I answered, trying to keep my voice steady. "Are you home?" Her voice was barely above a whisper, thick with worry. "I just walked in the door, sweetheart. I'm fine." There was a pause, and I pictured her in her bedroom, phone pressed to her ear, heart pounding just like mine. "Grandpa, I have to tell you something. Mom and Dad, they planned tonight for weeks. They wanted you to come for dinner, to drink, to get comfortable. The paperwork upstairs, it wasn't routine. They were going to have you sign over your share of the business. I heard them talking about it." The words hit harder than any accusation. "You're sure?" "I was in the hall. They said you were too stubborn, but with enough wine, you'd sign anything. Dad even called a lawyer friend to be ready just in case. Mom said it would all be legal as long as you didn't realize what you were signing." My breath caught. For a long moment, I couldn't speak. I thought of every warning sign, every cold glance, every time Olivia looked at me with fear in her eyes. "Thank you, Olivia, for telling me, for watching out for me." She sniffled. "You can't let them know I told you. Please, Grandpa." "I won't. You did the right thing. I'm so proud of you." There was a long silence. The house around me felt different now, less like a refuge, more like a stronghold. I sat at the kitchen table, the phone pressed to my ear even after Olivia hung up, and stared at the shadows on the wall. The trap had been real. I'd almost walked right into it, blinded by the hope that maybe, just maybe, my family still cared more about love than money. But Olivia cared. That was enough to keep fighting. Sleep did not come easy that night. I sat in my dim kitchen, the only sound the hum of the refrigerator and the distant patter of rain against the window. Olivia's words echoed in my mind, unraveling whatever threads of trust I'd tried to hold on to. My hands shook as I poured myself a glass of water, not from age, but from the cold realization that my own flesh and blood had planned my undoing. By morning, resolve replaced fear. I'd spent my life building things, houses, reputations, a family legacy. I wasn't about to lose it all because I'd been too trusting. I started with a notebook, scribbling down every memory, every conversation, every strange glance and missing piece from the past few weeks. I listed names, timelines, the odd way Eric and Samantha had hovered at every gathering, the carefully timed dinner, the paperwork, the lawyer friend. First, I called Officer Carla Ramirez. She listened patiently as I filled her in on the dinner, the pressure to drink, the push for signatures. "Mr. Bennett," she said gently, "I can't stop your son from asking you to sign things, but I can add this to your case file. If you feel threatened, if anyone tries to force you, you call me." Immediately. Her calm professionalism steadied me. Next, I walked across the street to Mrs. Carter's house. She opened the door before I could knock, concern etched deep in her face. "I was hoping you'd come by, Walter. I've been worried." I told her everything. Eric's anger, the tires, the dinner, Olivia's late-night call. She listened in silence, then nodded. "You're not alone in this. I'll write down what I saw that night. If you ever need me to speak up, I will." That promise felt like a lifeline. Finally, I called Daniel Brooks, my longtime attorney and, more importantly, a friend who never sugarcoated the truth. When I explained the situation, he was silent for a moment. Then his voice turned crisp and purposeful. "Walter, you need to document everything. Start a paper trail. And don't sign anything, especially if Eric or Samantha are present. If they pressure you, call me and I'll come over myself. We'll make sure you're protected." With each conversation, the isolation began to lift. I wasn't just an old man fighting shadows. I was someone with allies, with witnesses, with a plan. I spent the rest of the day gathering paperwork, old deeds, bank records, emails from Eric about business opportunities. I made copies of everything, storing one set at home and taking another to Daniel's office that afternoon. As dusk settled over the neighborhood, I sat at my desk, reviewing the evidence. The fear was still there, a dull ache in my chest, but now it was tempered by something stronger. Determination. If Eric and Samantha wanted a battle, they would get one on my terms. There's a certain calm that comes after you decide to stop running. By the next morning, my fear had hardened into resolve. I pulled out the old briefcase I'd once carried to City Hall meetings and began filling it with the evidence I'd gathered. Every email from Eric about his can't-miss investments, every note about the tire sabotage, Mrs. Carter's written statement, copies of the police report, even the invitations to those carefully staged family dinners. I spent hours at the dining room table, sorting and organizing. I drafted a clear, factual letter to Daniel Brooks, outlining the nature of my suspicions, the timeline, and the pattern of coercion. For each of Eric's failed business ventures, I attached supporting documents, making it impossible to claim ignorance or misunderstanding. I grouped everything into folders: family manipulation, financial exploitation, property damage. At noon, I slid the folders into a manila envelope and drove them over to Daniel's office. He met me at the door, his expression serious. We spent nearly an hour reviewing every detail. "Walter, you're doing the right thing," he said. "Most people don't think ahead until it's too late. This gives us leverage if Eric or Samantha try to challenge your competence, your ownership, or your rights." Leaving Daniel's office, I stopped at the post office. There, I prepared 3 more thick envelopes, one to the board of directors at Bennett Construction, one to the local business association, and one, anonymously, to Samantha's compliance department at her financial firm. Each packet included evidence of Eric and Samantha's coordinated pressure campaign, the attempt to manipulate me into signing over assets, and the police report on the tire incident. I didn't accuse directly, I simply stated the facts, attached dates, and let the truth do its work. Back home, I sent a careful group email to a few of Eric's former business partners, laying out the facts and asking them if they'd ever experienced similar pressure or questionable behavior. Within an hour, I received 2 replies. One confirming that Eric had tried to involve them in a family-backed investment, another expressing concern about Samantha's sudden interest in managing elderly clients' finances. By sunset, the first tremors of the counteroffensive had begun to ripple outward. Daniel called to confirm that he'd filed for an official statement on my mental fitness, preempting any attempt by Eric or Samantha to claim I was unfit to manage my affairs. He also reassured me that with the evidence on file, any legal attack from them would be met with a wall of documentation and witness testimony. That evening, I sat by the window with a cup of tea, watching the porch light flicker on as darkness fell. I felt the weight of the past week begin to shift, not gone, but no longer pressing down on my shoulders alone. I'd done everything I could to protect myself, my home, and my legacy. For the first time in days, I slept without keeping one eye open. Monday morning came with a strange sense of quiet, a pause before the world began to tilt. I stood by the kitchen window, cup of coffee in hand, watching the street outside. Over the weekend, I'd sent out my evidence, spoken with Daniel Brooks, my lawyer and trusted friend for decades. Now, as sunlight crept across the table, I wondered how long it would take for the first ripple to reach our doorstep. The answer was not long at all. By 9, my phone rang. The number belonged to the chairman of Bennett Construction's board, a man who'd built his business alongside me through boom and bust. "Walter, we've received some unsettling documents. There are questions about Eric, about attempted fraud, the police report. Are you all right? Is the company safe?" I assured him that I was handling things, but his concern lingered in his tone. The company I'd poured my life into was now at risk, not because of my work, but because of my son's actions. Within an hour, an email arrived from the compliance department of Samantha's financial firm. Samantha, my daughter-in-law, had always been sharp, ambitious, sometimes too ambitious for her own good. The email was cold and formal. "We would like to schedule an interview regarding a potential ethics violation involving family financial transactions." The walls were closing in around her, too. Eric called before lunchtime. His voice, once so sure, was now tight and brittle. "Dad, what did you do? People are calling me, emailing Sam. You're ruining us. This is family." I let him vent, hearing the panic behind the anger. "You forced my hand, Eric. You tried to take what wasn't yours. I'm not letting anyone, family or not, destroy what I built." He hung up. The silence that followed felt like a verdict. Just after noon, Olivia arrived at my doorstep. A backpack slung over her shoulder, her hair pulled back in a nervous ponytail. She looked younger than her 18 years, but her eyes were resolute. "Can I stay for a few days, Grandpa?" she asked quietly. I just need some space from Mom and Dad." I welcomed her in, heart aching with both relief and sadness. Olivia was my granddaughter, Eric's only child. Lately, she'd become my strongest ally, the one person in this mess who had chosen truth over comfort. I fixed her a sandwich, and we sat together in the kitchen, both of us grateful for the companionship. Later that afternoon, Madison dropped by. Madison was Olivia's closest friend since grade school, funny, loyal, always ready with a listening ear. She brought a bag of books and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. The 2 girls retreated to the porch, voices barely above a whisper. I could tell Madison was trying to reassure Olivia, reminding her she wasn't alone. As dusk settled over the house, my old friend George Miller called. George had been by my side for 40 years, first as a business partner, later as the neighbor who brought over soup when Ellen was sick, the man who'd seen me through loss and triumph. His voice, deep and steady, cut through the chaos. Walter, you did what any good man would do. Don't let guilt eat you up. Sometimes standing your ground is the only way to protect what matters. By evening, our small house was full of worry, of support, of the tentative hope that comes after a long storm. Olivia and Madison sat at the kitchen table, working through homework and, I suspected, much bigger questions. George's words echoed in my mind. Sometimes you have to let the rotten wood fall away before you can rebuild. Emails continue to arrive, one from a former business associate of Eric's, another from a neighbor who'd heard rumors about Samantha at her office. Each message confirmed what I already knew. The truth was spreading, and Eric and Samantha could no longer hide behind secrets. After dinner, as Olivia washed dishes, she looked at me with quiet gratitude. "Thank you, Grandpa, for believing me, for protecting us." I hugged her, feeling the weight of years lift from my shoulders. For the first time, there was no fear for tomorrow, only the certainty that, whatever came next, we would face it together. I've weathered storms in boardrooms, funerals, and empty bedrooms, but nothing prepared me for the quiet ache of waiting for your own family to come and explain themselves. That night, the air in my living room felt thick, every tick of the clock stretching my nerves tighter. Olivia sat beside me on the couch, her hand cold in mine. Every so often, she glanced at the window, the porch light painting uncertain shadows on the wall. When Eric's car finally pulled up, I saw Samantha in the passenger seat, her shoulders hunched as if she were bracing for a blow. They stood on the porch longer than necessary, as if hoping the confrontation might dissolve if they waited long enough. But some reckonings can't be postponed. I opened the door, and for a heartbeat, neither of them could meet my gaze. Eric's jaw worked, and Samantha's eyes were red-rimmed, her lipstick smeared. Olivia stayed close, silent but fierce, a reminder that truth had found its voice in this house. We gathered in the living room, the four of us, family in name, strangers in purpose. Eric started, his voice raw with exhaustion and accusation. "Dad, what is all this? The emails, the calls, the company board, everyone's talking. You're painting us as criminals. You're destroying everything." I held his gaze, feeling the years of disappointment and hope between us. "No, Eric, I'm finally refusing to let you destroy what I've built. You tried to take advantage of me, your own father. You sabotaged my car. You tried to trick me into signing my life away. I have the evidence. I have witnesses." His face twisted, a flicker of guilt flashing in his eyes before anger took over. "You always think the worst of me. You never believed I'd amount to anything unless you were the one pulling the strings." Samantha interjected, her words trembling but sharper than glass. "You went behind our backs, Walter. You humiliated us in front of the entire community. I lost clients. Eric's losing his job. You could have at least warned us." The heat in the room spiked. "Warn you?" I said, voice rising despite myself. "Warn you while you schemed to strip me of everything? While you poisoned Olivia's trust to get what you wanted? Family doesn't mean blind loyalty. It means honesty. It means protecting each other, even from ourselves." Eric's expression shifted, anger giving way to desperation. "We were drowning, Dad. We needed help. Every door was closing. If you'd just given us another chance, one more, maybe none of this would have happened." Olivia's voice cut through the tension, quiet but unwavering. "You didn't want help, Dad. You wanted control. You wanted what wasn't yours, and you were willing to hurt Grandpa for it." Samantha's eyes filled with tears, her shoulders shaking as she finally dropped the mask. "I didn't mean for it to go so far. I just wanted us to be safe. I wanted to protect my family." The pain in the room was nearly unbearable. I looked at my son, the boy I once taught to ride a bike, who I'd carried on my shoulders through summer fairs, now looking at me as if I were the enemy. "You could have come to me honestly, Eric. You could have told me the truth. But you lied. You tried to take what wasn't yours. That ends now." He slumped, his body folding in on itself. "I'm sorry, Dad," he whispered, voice cracking. I never wanted to hurt you. Samantha wiped her face, her voice ragged. We're sorry. But forgiveness and rescue were two different things. I steadied myself, reaching for Olivia's hand. From this day forward, there will be no more bailouts, no more secret deals. If you want to rebuild, you'll do it on your own. I will protect Olivia and myself, even if it means going to the law. For a long moment, no one spoke. The hurt and shame, the years of hope and disappointment hung between us like a fog. Then Eric stood, his shoulders bowed with defeat, and Samantha followed. At the door, he turned back, grief and regret warring in his eyes. I hope someday you'll remember the good parts, Dad. I did love you. I managed a nod, unable to trust my voice. They left into the darkness, the door closing soft and final behind them. Olivia leaned her head on my shoulder. Is it over? She asked, voice small but brave. I wrapped my arm around her, feeling the ache of loss, but also the first stirrings of peace. For now, sweetheart, for now, we're safe. And we're together. That's what matters most. After the storm, there's always a silence, sometimes peaceful, sometimes heavy. That night, after Eric and Samantha left, the house seemed to breathe differently. I sat in the living room with Olivia, neither of us speaking at first. The air was thick with everything that had just been said, and everything we both knew would never be said again. I looked at my granddaughter, the worry lines on her young face, the way she kept twisting a strand of hair around her finger. She'd been so brave, standing up to her father, speaking truth when it would have been easier to hide. I realized how much she'd grown in the space of a single, terrible week. Olivia, I said quietly, I know this isn't the future you wanted. I wish things could have been different. She looked at me, her eyes shining with tears she refused to let fall. I'm glad I'm here, Grandpa. I feel safer with you. At home, it was like I was walking on eggshells. I was always afraid Mom or Dad would find out I warned you. I reached across the couch and squeezed her hand. You did the right thing. I'm proud of you. Proud in a way I haven't been proud in a long time. She gave me a small, grateful smile. I just wanted to protect you. You're the only one who ever listens to me. The only one who never makes me feel like a burden. I thought about Ellen then, my late wife, Olivia's grandmother. She would have loved to see this moment, the two of us drawing strength from each other. Ellen always said family was built one honest conversation at a time. Later, Madison came by, knocking gently before letting herself in. She glanced between me and Olivia, then opened her arms. Olivia rushed to her, and for a while the two girls just held each other, letting the tears come at last. Madison had always been Olivia's anchor, her best friend since elementary school, the one who helped her through every heartbreak and every final exam. I was grateful for her presence now more than ever. Thank you, Mr. Bennett, Madison said softly, for standing by Olivia. Not every grown-up would do what you did. I shrugged, but my eyes stung. Sometimes the only thing you can do is tell the truth and let the pieces fall where they may. We sat around the kitchen table, eating leftover chicken and mashed potatoes. For the first time in days, Olivia and Madison laughed a real, honest laugh that filled the house with something like hope. It was a sound I hadn't realized I'd missed. Madison shared stories from school, gossip about teachers and classmates, even dreams for summer trips they'd been planning before things fell apart. I listened, smiling, feeling the heaviness in my chest begin to lift. When Madison left for the night, Olivia helped me clear the dishes. She paused, looking at me with new resolve. I want to stay here for a while. I want to finish the semester, maybe look for a summer job. Maybe I can help out around the house. You can stay as long as you want, I said, voice thick. This house is yours, too. She hugged me, fiercer than she ever had before. Thank you, Grandpa, for everything. After she went to bed, I lingered in the kitchen, the house finally quiet. I thought about what had been lost, but also what had been saved. Bonds built on truth, not secrets. Family, not just by blood, but by choice and courage. I looked out the window at the moon rising over the neighborhood, and for the first time in a long while, I felt something close to peace. There's a certain clarity that comes in the early hours, before the world's noise settles in. I woke just after dawn, the house unusually still. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel the old ache of dread in my chest. Instead, I felt lighter, as if the house itself had exhaled after holding its breath for too long. The kitchen windows glowed with the first pink of sunrise, and I stood for a while just watching the light creep across the tile floor. In that quiet, I noticed details I'd forgotten to appreciate, the way the light painted golden ribbons on Ellen's faded curtains, the faint scent of her lavender sachets lingering in the hall, the faint ticking of the clock that had measured out years of our lives. I used to resent these reminders, but now they seemed to anchor me, a gentle assurance that, even after so much had been lost, something steady remained. Olivia was already awake, wrapped in her grandmother Ellen's old robe, sitting at the table with a mug of tea cradled in both hands. She looked up as I entered, giving me a soft smile. In that moment, I saw not a child, but a young woman, still carrying the bruises of the past week, but stronger and more certain than before. "Couldn't sleep?" I asked quietly as I moved into the kitchen, the floor cool beneath my bare feet. She shook her head. "Too much on my mind, I guess. But it's not all bad thoughts. I feel different, like maybe things can actually get better from here." Her words lingered. There was hope in her voice, tentative but real. I poured myself a cup of coffee and joined her at the table. The steam curled between us, a fragile bridge across the distance we'd both felt in recent days. Outside, the world was waking up. Mrs. Carter's porch light flickered off. The newspaper landed with a soft thud on our driveway. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked and a baby cried, small reminders that life moves forward no matter what storms pass through. We sat in companionable silence, sipping our drinks, letting the peace settle in. For a while, we just listened to the rhythms of the house, the gentle hum of the refrigerator, the distant creak as the sun warmed the roof, the birds beginning their morning chorus. Eventually, Olivia. I thought about it for a long moment. Memories surfaced Eric as a boy, running through the yard with Ellen laughing after him. The night I brought Samantha home to meet the family for the first time. The day Olivia was born, Ellen's tears of joy. Then the harder moments. Shouting matches, slammed doors, the cold silence that followed betrayals. The years when I'd hoped every check, every second chance would change something. "Reg?" She nodded. "You already are," I said, reaching over to squeeze her hand. "You were braver than I ever was at your age. You chose honesty, even when it meant standing alone." Olivia smiled, the corners of her mouth trembling. I saw Ellen in her, the same stubborn chin, the same spark in her eyes. For a moment, I let myself. We spent the next. I told her stories about Ellen, about how her grandmother always. Olivia listened, head resting on her hand, eyes distant but bright. "I wish I remembered Grandma better," she whispered. "I feel like I'm just now becoming the person she wanted me to be." After breakfast, Olivia helped me in the garden. The air was. We took breaks to watch the clouds drift overhead. Later, as we sat on, Olivia leaned her head on my shoulder. The sun rose higher, warming our faces. I realized then that, as the neighborhood came alive around us, I felt a quiet pride. Not in the money I'd protected or the company I'd built, but in the bond I'd rebuilt with my granddaughter. We stayed outside until the sun was high, talking about everything and nothing. Olivia asked if I'd teach her how to. As I watched Olivia laugh and stretch beneath the wide Oregon sky, I felt grateful not for the avoidance of pain, but for the chance to grow through it, to find meaning after the storm. The house, the garden, the stories, these were all parts of a life, but Olivia was the living proof that the best parts endure. And as the breeze carried the scent of new blossoms through the open window, I closed my eyes and whispered a silent thank you to Ellen, to God, to the stubborn hope that even after betrayal, a new day always comes. Time has a way of softening the sharpest edges, though some wounds never completely disappear. After the storm of that spring, the Bennett house settled into a new rhythm, one built on honesty rather than avoidance, on simple routines instead of silent tension. It was as if the very walls had relaxed, breathing in the quiet that had finally returned. The neighborhood, too, seemed to recognize the change. In the early evenings, Mrs. Carter would wave from her porch, sometimes stopping by with fresh-baked bread or a jar of blackberry jam. Her visits always came with gentle conversation, sometimes advice, sometimes just a warm silence as we watched the world go by together. She'd tell Olivia stories about her own children, how she'd struggled to let them go, how she'd learned to forgive mistakes, both theirs and her own. It comforted me to see Olivia listen so intently, learning about resilience from someone who had lived so much longer than either of us. Madison visited often, bringing laughter and stories from campus, helping Olivia remember that life could still be bright and full of possibility. Sometimes she'd arrive with a new book to share, sometimes with nothing but a smile and a bag of cookies she'd baked in her dorm kitchen. They'd spend hours sprawled across the living room floor, planning summer adventures, talking about dreams and disappointments in equal measure. I'd listen from the other room, grateful that Olivia had someone her own age to remind her that the world was still wide open. Eric and Samantha faded from our daily lives. I heard through the grapevine that Eric had moved to a small apartment across town, taking on odd jobs landscaping, delivery driving, even a stint at the hardware store where we used to shop together for tools. It wasn't the life he'd imagined, but there was a certain relief in knowing he was trying, slowly learning how to stand on his own. Samantha's firm had completed their ethics review. She kept her license, but her ambitions had been clipped. She moved in with her sister for a while, and though we didn't speak, I wished her no harm, just the wisdom to find a better way forward. Olivia flourished in this new peace. Freed from the suffocating tension that had filled our home for so long, she poured herself into her studies, her laughter returning in small bursts that grew each day. She picked up a part-time job at a local bookstore, falling in love with the scent of old paper and the quiet hum of customers browsing for stories. She and Madison began planning a trip up the coast for the summer, a chance to see new places and build memories that belonged only to them. It was her first real taste of independence, and I saw her grow stronger, more joyful, as the shadows of the past finally receded. Some evenings, Olivia would join me in the garden, hands in the dirt, sharing her dreams for the future as we tended Ellen's roses. She'd tell me about her favorite authors, her hopes for graduate school, her fears about making new friends or losing old ones. Other nights, she'd curl up on the porch swing, lost in a novel or a phone call with Madison, her laughter drifting through the open window like music. Watching her, I felt a quiet pride. She was becoming her own person, and I had the privilege of witnessing it. For myself, I learned to cherish the quiet. I found comfort in the small rituals, brewing the perfect cup of coffee, tending the roses Ellen had planted years before, walking the familiar blocks as the sun set over Portland. I noticed details I'd once overlooked, the way the maple leaves glowed gold in the late afternoon, the distant sound of children's voices rising from the park, the gentle hush that settled over the neighborhood as night approached. George Miller would stop by now and then, his arrival always announced by a heavy knock and a laugh that filled the house. We talked less about business and more about life, about what it means to trust, to forgive, to let go of things you can't control. Sometimes we'd sit on the back porch with a couple of beers, watching the sky turn from blue to violet to black, sharing stories of triumph and regret. George had lost his wife years ago, and he understood the ache of absence better than most. "You know, Walt," he said one evening, "starting over isn't about forgetting. It's about letting your heart be open to what comes next, even after it's been broken." Sometimes, late at night, I'd feel Ellen's presence in the house, the echo of her laughter, the warmth of her hand on my shoulder. I'd remember her words, "Family is built, Walter, not by blood, but by the choices we make together." I finally understood what she meant. In the months since everything changed, I found myself talking to her, more quiet prayers, whispered confessions, silent gratitude. I hoped she'd be proud of the way I'd tried to carry her lessons forward, to choose kindness over resentment and hope over regret. The seasons shifted. Spring faded into summer, and the world outside grew lush and green. Mrs. Carter's hydrangeas bloomed in blues and purples, and the air was sweet with the scent of honeysuckle. Olivia celebrated her 19th birthday with a picnic in the backyard. Madison and a handful of friends gathered around a cake topped with fresh strawberries. I watched them from the patio, marveling at the simple joy in their laughter, the ease with which they moved through the world. Eric called once, quietly, asking after Olivia. There was no anger in his voice, just a tired kind of humility. "Tell her I'm proud of her," he said. "And thank you for not giving up on me, even when I made it impossible." We didn't say much more, but the conversation lingered with me, a small sign that maybe, someday, forgiveness would travel both ways. One evening, as summer crept in, Olivia and I sat on the porch watching the sky blush gold. She leaned her head on my shoulder. "Are you happy, Grandpa?" I thought for a moment, feeling the cool breeze, the steady beat of my heart, the peace that had finally returned. "I am, sweetheart, I am. We've been through a lot, but we found our way back to what matters." She smiled, her eyes bright with hope. "Thank you for teaching me what real family is." I squeezed her hand, grateful beyond words. "Thank you, Olivia, for reminding me." As dusk fell and the first stars blinked to life, I realized the legacy I'd leave was not just a house or a name, but the courage to confront hard truths, the strength to forgive, and the love that endures even after everything else is gone. These days, I find myself looking forward to the mornings, the way sunlight spills across the kitchen floor, the promise of coffee brewing, the sound of Olivia humming softly as she gets ready for her day. I watch her step out into the world, backpack slung over her shoulder, her spirit light and sure. I know there will be more challenges ahead, more storms to weather, but I trust in her resilience and in the quiet faith we've rebuilt together. For anyone listening, I hope you find your own peace, no matter how hard the journey. And if this story touched you, I'd be honored if you shared it, left a comment, or simply held your loved ones a little closer tonight. The greatest legacy is not what we accumulate, but the love and understanding we pass on one sunrise, one day, one choice at a time. Betrayal can happen in any family, and even when the pain feels unbearable, God still opens a door to a new chapter in our lives. The wisdom I hold is simple. Honesty brings light, even into the darkest corners. When we dare to tell the truth, to look straight at the fractures within our hearts and relationships, that light reveals what needs healing and what needs letting go. Honesty not only with others, but also with ourselves, is the first step towards stopping the slow bleed of wounds we thought had already scarred over. Honesty is hard and sometimes messy, but it is holy work. No matter how deeply we've been hurt, God's grace gives us the courage to forgive and to rebuild trust. Forgiveness does not erase memory. It frees the heart from the heavy burden of resentment. Rebuilding trust is a journey of small steps, a word kept, a promise fulfilled, a look that says, "I'm here." Sometimes we need healthy boundaries, time, and support along the way. Yet in every step, grace holds us up, reminding us slow growth is still growth. We can ask for help from mentors, counselors, pastors, or trusted friends, and practice forgiveness as a daily choice. It is precisely by facing these stories of betrayal that we discover our own strength and the true power of love. Love does not hide the truth. Love chooses healing over punishment, perseverance over walking away. Let your life be a living testament to compassion and patience. Remember, healing is not forgetting, but choosing to move forward with hope and humility. Humility to own our part when needed, to apologize when we are wrong, and to receive an apology when the other person finds the courage to come back. It is a rugged kind of love that keeps showing up. God never abandons those who seek truth and kindness, even after the fiercest storms. After the longest night, dawn arrives. After the tears, a smile can bloom again. If this story has touched your soul, please leave a comment below and join our circle by subscribing to receive more betrayal stories and life lessons. Your voice, your story matters here. Stay with us, share your journey, and let this community hold space for your healing. Together we heal, together we learn to love, and together we step into the new chapter that God has opened for us to enter.